Hello, everyone. This is a new edition of Tomaskycast from New Republic Video. I'm Michael Tomasky. I'm the editor of the New Republic, and I am joined this week by Kati Marton. Kati is the extraordinary journalist and author who has written so much about Europe and her native Hungary, and we're here to talk to her about all of those things. Kati, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for having me. You catch me in a rather somber mood morning after the results from my native land's terrible election outcome.
Yeah, it was very, very disappointing. So, tell people, I guess, first of all, were you surprised at the margin of victory? The polls were closer.
I was, and I had hopes for Peter Márki-Zay. The opposition had united behind this conservative mayor from rural Hungary, who said that he actually was all the things that Viktor Orbán pretends to be. That is to say, a good conservative Catholic father of seven, who was in favor of the EU and good relations with the world in general, and treating Moscow as the real danger, not treating Brussels, i.e. the EU, as the enemy, which is what outrageously Viktor Orbán has been doing.
Yeah. How did the six opposition parties make the deal to get behind him?
Well, I mean, that was almost miraculous given their history of not being able to agree on anything.
Yeah.
I think it was a sense from the far left to the far right that they had to stop Orbán, who's been in power for 12 years, Europe's longest running statesman, and who was taking the country in a shameful direction. And so even Jobbik, the far right anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic party, and the former communists all came together behind this very decent, well-qualified man. I don't know him personally, but I certainly was in favor of change.
And why him? Why? I mean, he's just a small town mayor. How did it land? How did the needle land on him?
Well, that too was a surprise, because actually the mayor of Budapest looked to be in line, but it was a sense that because, as I mentioned, he really seemed to be the real deal, the real deal that Orbán isn't. So not a man of not an urban globalist, but a rural guy who speaks very good English, has good connections in the U.S., had worked in Canada, etc. And he seemed, and I think he is, somebody who everybody could deal with, because he's non-dogmatic, and it was kind of a desperate rearguard action, but gave hope to all of us. And I'm part of the Hungarian global diaspora, and we really tried to get behind Peter, but you cannot. Here's a shocker: you cannot have fair elections if the media is utterly controlled by the ruling party. So you can have free elections, but not fair elections.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the media and how he has taken this control via what laws or regulations or edicts or what have you.
Yeah. Well, he's a mini Putin. He's playing by the same script, but he's Putin light. That is to say, journalists in Hungary don't get murdered, nor do they. As you know, my parents were journalists in Hungary who were arrested for the crime of being good reporters during the Cold War. The journalists no longer get arrested in Hungary; they get driven out of business. So Orbán's buddies buy up big media conglomerates and turn them into an echo chamber for Viktor Orbán. And it's really virtually, I go to Hungary, or not any longer, but I used to go to Hungary pretty much every year, and would get a lot of good media attention, and they translate my books, and I'm rather well known in Hungary. And all those places that used to be very open to the likes of me coming from New York, talking about what's going on in the world, have all shuttered.
Wow.
And it's, there are a few sort of boutique remnants of independent media that Orbán doesn't bother with. But the fact is that 90% of Hungarians get their news, like Russians, from state TV, and state TV is Orbán TV, and you just cannot break through that. And Peter Markizai, the defeated candidate, had a total of 5 minutes on state TV.
Wow.
I mean, how do you persuade people in 5 minutes? And of
For
course,
the entire campaign, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an utterly corrupt system run by a mafia state. I mean, I have to call it that because Orbán and his pals and his family have become very wealthy, and partly the wealth comes from the EU's pockets, EU taxpayers, and I have to say, Michael, that the EU has been extraordinarily indulgent of Orbán's shenanigans, and I think that's changing now. I cannot imagine that it will not change now.
Yeah. Volodymyr Zelenskiy interjected himself into the campaign.
Yes.
Comparing or characterizing Orbán as Putin's biggest cheerleader and ally in Europe. I'm going to guess, if anything, that helped Orbán.
I fear so. It helped him with his base, and it really, honestly, this feels quite personal for me, because it is my homeland, and it is. I lost my homeland once before as a small child when the Russian, in the case Soviet, tanks rolled into my hometown of Budapest, and thus began my life as a refugee. But then I got it back, and I became very involved through Central European University, and which Orbán, of course, kicked out for the crime of being too successful. Right. And now I feel like I've lost it again. I have really no interest right now in returning to Hungary, and I mean, I will do everything I can to speak out, to continue to speak out, especially on behalf of the press, which is my particular cause. But it's not at all the way I expected my homeland to be heading in the year 2022, when actually I've known Viktor Orbán since, I mean, I first encountered him in 1989 when he was this skinny bearded guy who wanted to kick the Russians out, and gave a fiery speech saying so. And where
was he then politically? Was he on the right then? But
you know, Michael, he's an opportunist, the way Milosevic was. You know, he found the right cause to keep himself in power, and because he was so in those days he was Fidesz. His party was a youthful party of Democrats and reformists, and then he was elected, and then he was defeated after one term. For the usual reasons, and he swore that he would never again risk defeat. And therefore he found unfortunately the one cause that's always a winner in that part of the world, which is nationalist, revanchist, implicitly anti-Semitic, definitely anti-immigrant. When there was the big wave of migrants from the Middle East, he was the first to throw up barbed wire, and all of that played to an enthusiastic audience. I'm ashamed to say, Hungary, unlike Germany, has never gone through the painful work of dealing with its own history, and I really consider that as key to its current behavior. That unlike the Germans, and I've spent the last few years studying not only Angela Merkel, but her country. Hungary has never done that hard work of saying, how is it possible that this so-called civilized country in the heart of Europe turned against a segment of its own population, namely the Jewish population, and collaborated to the degree it did with Eichmann and his thugs, and then came the communists, and a large segment of the population, switched uniforms right quick and collaborated with the communists. So it's never done that hard work, and as a result, a demagogue like Orbán comes along and strokes the national ego and says, we were a great empire, back in the day, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and we can be again, and I can make that happen.
Was there ever a moment since 1989 when you were hopeful that work was being done, that someone was doing that work? I mean, I remember, I know 1/20th of what you know, but I remember that in 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall really started in Hungary, as far as I'm concerned, with Gyula Horn going to the border and cutting that hole in the fence. So
there was hope.
Was there a moment of hope then? How did it get, swiped away?
Well, democratic roots were very shallow in Hungary. Could it be otherwise? Coming out of 40, 50 years of communism, and before that, Hungary has the dubious honor of having been the first country in Europe to pass anti-Semitic legislation in 1920, limiting to 5% the Jewish admission to universities. That's when the great intellectual migration began in the 20s, and as always, we the United States were the beneficiaries of that intellectual migration. So it's it's not really such a shocker that with such shallow roots you can start turning the country into something not remotely democratic. And then came, of course, the financial crash of 2008, and Hungarians were very exposed and badly burnt by that, and that tapped into anti-Western, anti-capitalist sentiments. And here's another thing about Hungary that people often miss: the Hungarian language has played a big role in this, which is something that we Hungarians are very proud of. It's an impossible language for anyone else to learn, and it's like a prison too, because Hungarians feel very isolated in Europe. It's a singular tribe. Arthur Koestler, the great Arthur Koestler, said that Hungarians are the loneliest people in the world. He was Hungarian, and he knew what he was talking about. And partly it's that language. So Orbán uses that. Because he really speaks with a forked tongue. He speaks one language in Brussels to his fellow EU, and then in Hungary, he speaks another language which most of his fellow Europeans don't understand. And he identified Brussels in this campaign as the enemy. And late in the campaign, he began, and this I find truly grotesque, identifying Zelensky as one of his opponents.
Mhm.
I mean, the very day that we were horrified by the scenes of mass graves and dead bodies in the wake of the Russian retreat in Bucha,
Yeah.
Orbán, in his election victory speech, said, "I defeated not only Brussels, not only Soros."
Mhm.
George Soros is his demon of choice, by the way.
Right.
He went to Oxford University on a Soros scholarship.
Right.
But found in Soros the perfect scapegoat for everything, a capitalist Western Jewish, blah blah. And so he put those three. He lumped those three as the foes that Viktor Orbán, defeated.
Yeah.
So the EU, Ukraine, which shares a border with Hungary,
Right.
and again, I go back to the language because this forked tongue that with which Orbán communicates, he pretends or professes to be supportive of sanctions against Russia, but meanwhile, on the home front,
Yeah.
he praises Putin and was in Moscow just, I don't know, days before the invasion, and does not allow for weapons to be shipped to Ukraine through Hungary. He nominally supports the sanctions, but he uses the Moscow's language, doesn't call it a war. He says it's a military operation, straight KGB terminology, special operation. Yeah. And basically he ran on a platform of, I'm going to keep us out of this war, which isn't our war, and I'm going to keep the gas and oil pumping because the rest of Europe is going to suffer, but we Hungarians, we will not. Yeah. And it remains to be seen. I mean, really, Michael, the ball is in the EU's court now, as far as I can see. I have to say that Merkel, who I found to be obviously a remarkable leader in so many ways, and endured for 16 years. But here with Orbán, I think she had a blind spot. She was so traumatized by Brexit that she didn't want to risk another defection from the EU. And Orbán was Hungary. Hungary was a part of the EU, and so she she likes to pick her battles, and she didn't think that he was worth a big battle royal over. Okay, so just let him get away with this. Well, I think it was, who's it going to hurt? A nation of 10 million with a very small economy. Well, as a matter of fact, Hungary now punches way above its weight and has been embraced by the club of autocrats as the role model, and by our own American far right, and not even so far right. The Republicans point to him, not only notably Tucker Carlson, who's made 2 trips to Budapest and has become one of Orbán's best propagandists, but also Trump and the European populists as well, like Marine Le Pen. Yeah. And others, but above all, the capo di capo, Vladimir Putin, right, embraces him. All very bad news for the EU, and, if I may say, the real danger to NATO, because he's in NATO, and so you know, it's like having a Moscow mole inside the West's
Right.
security system.
Well,
Dangerous.
there'll be a worse one of those if Donald Trump gets reelected president.
Let's not contemplate that yet. We've got sufficient horrific things unfolding today without
sure.
adding that one.
Yeah, that's for sure. Listen, let's as you lean there a little bit toward your right, people can get a good view of that photo of Angela Merkel, which is the cover of your book. Talk about the book for a little bit. It's an amazing success. What's the basic thesis, and what are the lessons people can take away from her story?
Well, thank you so much. So yes, it's become the international version of her life and times. 18 languages translated. I learned so much in trying to deconstruct this supremely private person who was leader of the West for quite a period. Under Obama, who couldn't bear to deal with Putin, who, Obama said to Merkel, he just lies to me night and day. Well, he lies to everybody night and day, but Merkel became the sort of rampart holding back the populist movement during the Putin's first aggression into Ukraine in 2014, and froze that conflict in negotiations that were epic, and I describe in great detail. And I do think that she's the only one who he respected as a fellow statesman and as an interlocutor. She was the only, she basically kept him under control for 16 years. And I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that he launched this war just weeks after she left the chancellery. But she's not exactly who we think she is. At times when I was writing this book, I felt like I was writing volume 2 of The Prince, Machiavelli's The Prince, only I would call it The Princess, because she is a very canny politician, which is not how we think of her, not how she wants us to think of her. But you don't get to be elected chancellor of a European country that never even had a queen if you are a woman, if you are from the East, because she was 35 when she first crossed from East Berlin to West Berlin the night the wall fell. And she was a scientist, so she had no political experience whatsoever. So I wanted to find out, how did she do this? And she did it by a combination of, start with the fact that she's brilliant. She has a photographic memory. She always goes into every negotiation knowing more and better prepared than her interlocutors. Drove Trump crazy. He'd never dealt with a woman like that. I detail incidents where Putin and Trump tried to shake her remarkable composure. Because she doesn't engage with bullies. What she does is she drives them crazy by pretending she doesn't hear them when they're taunting her, and when Trump tossed some Starburst candies at her that he'd fished out of his pocket and said at a G8 meeting, I believe it was, and said, "Here, Angela, don't say I never gave you anything." And the rest of her fellow heads of state were just horrified. This was such crude behavior. She pretended she didn't even see it. And with Putin he gave her first the KGB eye staring contest, who blinks first. Well, she did not blink first. And then in desperation, he unleashed his large black Labrador in their meeting, knowing that she was afraid of dogs. But she just absolutely froze. And nothing drives a bully crazier than not to get a reaction.
Sure.
So many such, we can all learn. You don't have to be a politician to learn about power, how to get it, and how to hold on to it from this woman who broke Bismarck's record and matched Helmut Kohl's.
Wow.
Helmut Kohl, by the way, just another instance of her ruthlessness when necessary, was her great mentor.
Oh.
Helmut Kohl, the titanic figure of German unification, an enormous in every way figure in German politics.
Yeah.
But she ended his career despite the fact that he was her mentor. Appointed her the youngest cabinet minister in German history, minister for women and youth, two subjects she could care less about, but she was willing to bide her time. But then when he was caught in a kickback scandal, no one else in the party, the Christian Democrats, had the courage to say, Helmut, it's time to go.
Yeah.
She wrote, without telling anyone, she wrote a column saying basically the king is dead.
Wow.
Long live the queen, in effect. I mean, that's what cleared her passage eventually to be chancellor. So it's a remarkable tale of endurance, and I am sure that she is horrified by what is happening now in Ukraine and to the Western order that she played such a role in preserving under 4 very challenging years of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And again, it was under attack. But now I think we're in a in some ways it's worse than the Cold War, because there are no rules here, because Putin, who warned us in a speech in 2007, speech he gave in Munich, and he basically said, I'm not going to play by your rules. But we have been sleepwalking, and we've been jolted awake. I hope, because this is, what we're seeing in Ukraine is potentially genocide on our watch.
So let me conclude by asking you about the war. How long is this going to last? Like, give us like a reasonably optimistic scenario, and then your fearful, grim scenario.
Yeah. Well, it's already if by some miracle a peace deal is struck next week, it will already have cost the world mightily, because my own homeland of Hungary was occupied by the Russians, but it was not destroyed. Yeah. What is happening in Ukraine is the destruction of a country, of its people, its culture, its architecture, it's all out of one man's personal pique. That how dare these Ukrainians not want to join Mother Russia? He's so out of touch with what has been happening in Ukraine since Ukraine was granted independence. It's become a flourishing, imperfect, but flourishing democracy, and somehow he missed that he really did miscalculate how they would fight to preserve that. And we, the United States, are not used to supporting countries that are really willing to fight for their freedom, and who don't want us there. They want our absolute support with weapons, with arms, but they're not asking for our boots on the ground at all. We're not. I mean, we didn't have that in Vietnam. We didn't have that in Iraq or in Afghanistan. So this is a fighting country that is being destroyed before our eyes. And I think it's the cause of our generation. I hope so. I hope it's not the cause du jour, because that would really be, well, I mean, when we ask our grandparents, those of us who are of European background, what did you do during the Nazi years?
Mhm.
Grandpa, our grandkids are going to be asking the same thing of us. What did you do when this angry man in the Kremlin set out to brutalize and destroy a country? I mean, those images that we're now getting of people with their in mass graves whose hands were tied behind their back, those evoke very sharply to me images from Hitler's
Putin and so on. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I would like to see Merkel play a role in bringing Putin to his senses, because she does have a very clear understanding of his capacity for deceit and cruelty.
Yeah.
Because she too was raised in the Soviet system, obviously came away with different conclusions about that system. But and they literally speak each other's languages. She speaks perfect Russian, and he speaks fluent German as a result of his KGB years in Dresden.
Yeah.
So if somebody asked me, I would send Merkel to Moscow, because he may just be looking for a face-saving way from that tree. But also, just in closing, Michael, I think he's a different man than he was even 2 years ago, if I can indulge in a little amateur shrinkage. I think that his isolation has been nearly total in the COVID years. Like so many all-powerful people, fear is not a good, does not encourage honest advice. Terror is not a good way to get the truth out of your advisors. No one seems to be signing up to tell him what's really going on, and that is incredibly dangerous to the world. I'm sorry, I'm not giving the upbeat prognosis.
No, I don't think there is an upbeat prognosis. But
we're in a bad situation. Where this is right now is the challenge of our generation, I think, and remains to be seen whether we're up to it. It certainly has sobered us up and has brought our two parties to a degree of comity and sanity. I'm hoping.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Kati Marton, not the most uplifting conversation we could have had, but that's not your fault. But tons of insight, and really a great pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And next time, let's pick a more cheerful subject.
Got it.